All right, welcome to Financial Fridays with Sainies and Equitable. Today's topic is long-term care planning, and Sainies is very excited to offer these sessions in cooperation with our corporate partner, Equitable Advisors. And before we begin, we will hear a few words from Equitable.
Who Equitable Advisors is. We are a large financial firm and been a strategic partner of Sainies for the last 10 years. In that, we've had a commitment to the K-12 marketplace, making sure that educators are educated about their finances. We've been able to give those members additional support that's needed to make some of the biggest decisions in their life, like preparing for their retirement and their kids' college education. When an Equitable Advisor meets with a Sainies member, what our objective is to give them the confidence that they need going into retirement, making one of the biggest financial decisions they'll ever make in their life, to best assist them prepare with whatever their financial goals are. Equitable provides Sainies members includes financial resources and articles, complimentary financial profile meetings and an asset map, professional development educational webinars to units, and then in 2025 we're going to be doing a Ready to Retire series for people that are at least 1 to 3 years out from retirement and want to know how to finalize next steps. One of the benefits of being a Sainies member is on the first Friday of each month, we've always provided a Financial Friday series. It's a 30-minute series that goes from 12 to 12:30 that's presented by local regional representatives at Equitable that manage each region within Sainies on a variety of topics, including planning for the future, student loan forgiveness, and healthcare and retirement. What I would want Sainies members to know about the Equitable relationship is that you're going to have questions that come up, and there's always a tremendous amount of resources. There's an email address, sainiesmembers@equitable.com, that can be utilized, and there's always somebody on the other end of that email address to address any questions, comments, or concerns. Best time to plan for retirement is today. Looking at the future immediately or as soon as you're able to, realistically, you're going to be best prepared for that future. Sometimes if people haven't looked for the financial future yet, minimally 7 to 10 years out from retirement, that threshold absolutely must start because you still have time to make effective change, tweaks, and adjustments to your financial situation to best be prepared. The most important message for Sainies members to know is that Equitable Advisors is there to help them as life comes up. It is normal and it's going to happen where there's questions, concerns, things you're unsure about, and you've got a tremendous amount of resources to help and support you through that.
All right. And joining us today is from Equitable is Luke Yanklowski. Thanks for being here, Luke. And just a reminder that this session is being recorded, and we will save questions until the end of the presentation. But feel free to add questions to the chat at any time. A reminder that our Q&A time is best used for general questions, but please know the Equitable team is available at any time to answer your personal questions as well. You will find contact information for your regional reps at sainies.org. Now I will turn it over to you, Luke.
Thanks, Paige. Can you just confirm for me you can see my screen?
Yes. Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here on this Friday. I'm excited to talk to you about the importance of long-term care planning. So just kind of to follow up on something that PH had said. So if you ever have a question, want to connect about anything deeper, a more one-off situation, whatever it might be, feel welcome to scan the QR code, or you can always email sainiesmembers@equitable.com, and we can have a one-on-one session and go through whatever questions or topics you want to cover. Just a little disclosure, I need everyone to read for like 30 seconds before I get started today. Okay. Long-term care planning is an important topic to cover and is a difficult topic for many. For any of you that have experienced people, loved ones in your life that have go into a long-term care facility, you know it can be extremely hard on them, but extremely hard on the family as well. And there can be a lot of tough conversations involved there. So doing proper planning, it doesn't just protect the person that goes into the long-term care facility, it protects the family that will inevitably be affected as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So the consequences of what we call informal care. So informal care is when a family member, a loved one, something of that nature, somebody of that nature is taking care of the person needing long-term care services. 53% of caregivers report having to change their work schedule. Often taking work off or taking time off altogether, but it could be coming in late, leaving early, whatever it might be. 20% of caregivers suffer from depression. And I'm sure some of you on this call have been a caregiver before. You know it's not an easy thing. You're trying to help somebody, a loved one, through one of the most difficult periods of their life. Caregivers are at a higher risk because of this for multiple chronic diseases. They often neglect their own health, pretty much their own everything during that time of caregiving because it's a full-time job to be an informal caregiver. 53% have indicated that a decline in their health compromised primarily to that care provided. As I said, they just neglect it. Um, and it often does not bring families closer. As I said, it's a very stressful and challenging time. So again, when you think about should I plan for long-term care or what should I do for this? Just remember, it's not just about how it affects you, the individual. It's how it affects you and your entire family, because inevitably they will be affected as well. Some things to consider. 70% of people over age 65 will need long-term care services. Now, long-term care services does not just mean going into a nursing home. There are many other forms of long-term care service that I'll get into, but 70% of people at one point will need some sort of long-term care service. So hope is not a strategy. It's just hoping you won't need long-term care is not an appropriate strategy. 7 out of 10 people will need long-term care. The average duration of caregiving is 4 years. I'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but that's regularly increasing. Now, the average care for a long-term care facility, like a nursing home, is shorter than 4 years, but overall, the time somebody needs care on average is 4 years. 16% will actually need it even more than 5 years. 1 in 3 people will end up in some form of long-term care facility. And it doesn't just affect 65-year-olds. There's over 6 million Americans receiving long-term care services between the ages of 18 and 64. And these numbers are growing and they're growing fast. So if you think it won't affect me, I'll be all right, it affects just about all Americans. Again, hope is not a strategy. People have to plan for long-term care. Talking a little bit about the cost. So this is 2024 and 2025. So the lighter purple is 2024 numbers, the darker purple is 2025 numbers. So you can see there's a lot of different types of long-term care services. This is for Rochester, New York. That's where I'm based out of. If you're in Syracuse, Buffalo, Albany, it really doesn't, it's pretty much exactly the same. Down by the city is a little bit more expensive. If I want something like an adult daycare, in 2025, the average cost per month was $4,400. If I wanted a private room in a nursing home, the average was 18,200. And you can see, obviously, it ranges in there. If I want a semi-private room, it's 16,000. If I'm in an assisted living facility or community, it's 5,700. If I have homemaker services or home health aid, it's about 7 to 8,000. So obviously it ranges, but you can pretty much pick any of these numbers, $4,000 to $18,000 a month on average. Doesn't matter what you do, it's not cheap. That's $50,000 to $200 plus $1,000 in 1 year for long-term care services. You take that out 3, 4 years, obviously that gets pretty expensive. As you can probably imagine from looking at the cost on the previous slide, within a few years, long-term care can erode estate assets. So I'll talk about it on my last slide, but there's something called a Medicaid spend down. So Medicaid will force people to spend their assets before they're willing to pay, meaning that, well, if I'm paying $200,000 a year for a nursing home, if I have $1 million saved, it only takes me 5 years for that to be completely wiped out. Really, like who's affected the most by long-term care really is the middle class individual or middle class individual or family that's the most affected or most negatively affected by long-term care. And one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to long-term care and long-term care insurance versus health insurance. Medicare and private health insurance plans are not long-term care insurance. Long-term care insurance is in its totally separate category. Most private health insurance programs offer nothing in terms of long-term care, and Medicare, as we'll see later, is very, very limited when it comes to long-term care. Just another note as well when it comes to nursing homes specifically, the population of nursing homes is about 67% women. For whatever reason, not that more women go into long-term care facilities, but they tend to live a lot longer in there. Men typically pass away relatively quickly to being in a nursing home. So just know it doesn't necessarily affect people equally. Generally, women are in nursing homes much longer, are more often going in there or in there. Okay. So how do you qualify? Medicare, you can qualify. You have to be 65 years old, or certain disabilities can qualify someone for Medicare. It really just comes on the basis of the condition that you have. Medicare is very short-term coverage when it comes to long-term care. It is not designed to pay for long-term care. It's actually specifically designed not to pay for long-term care. So again, if you have Medicare, if you're on Medicare currently, I don't care what supplemental advantage plans you took, it is not going to cover your or your long-term care services. Medicaid. A big difference between Medicare and Medicaid is Medicare is universal. It's the same, or A and B is the same across the United States. Medicaid is state to state specific. So if you live in New York State, the qualifications are not the same if you move down to Florida. So you have to be careful here because if you're talking to someone and they're out of state, just know that their Medicaid qualifications can be different. Medicaid, effectively, you need a financial hardship. You need to be under a certain threshold of income and net worth to qualify for Medicaid. If you're over that threshold, Medicaid will take those assets and income until you're under the threshold. And then there are standalone long-term care insurance policies, long-term care insurance with long-term care riders. So first you have to qualify for the actual policies, the long-term care insurance or long-term care riders, which basically, if any of you have ever been through like a life insurance underwriting, you go through a similar underwriting process to qualify for the long-term care. You do typically have to be in a little bit better health for long-term care than life insurance. And then from there, you just have to not be able to perform two of the six activities of daily living, like feeding, bathing, getting up from a chair. If you can't do two of those six, typically speaking, the long-term care insurance or life insurance with a rider will pay out. Breaking down a little bit further of what Medicare covers. So again, the main thing to just keep in mind here is Medicare is not long-term care insurance. It will cover some very short-term care. So if I need, if I broke my leg and I need some physical therapy, some PT, it will cover some of those services. So that's where Medicare can be very helpful. Obviously, when you're over the age of 65, the likelihood of falling and breaking a bone increases drastically. This is where Medicare can help. Doesn't do anything for you in terms of home health care and adult care. If you go into a skilled nursing facilities, it will cover you up to 100 days. However, there is a copay of $200 a day from day 21 to 100. So 80 times 200 obviously can become relatively expensive, and you would have been hospitalized for a couple days here. So it can cover that skilled nursing facility for a period of time, for a very limited period of time. After 100 days, you're just paying whatever the skilled nursing facility cost is. Does not cover a nursing home at any point, and it can be used for hospice care. So if you're terminally ill, you can use Medicare to cover hospice care. Again, Medicare is very short term. It's really not designed for long-term care insurance. Medicaid. Often when you go into a nursing home or a long-term care facility, they will have PTs, OTs, things of that nature. So Medicaid can cover those things if they're within the long-term care facility. And it can pretty much cover anything on any type of long-term care services. You just have to be under a certain amount of assets. And really, Medicaid allows you to keep a very, very limited amount. It's in 2025, it was about $2,000 for a single individual and $3,000 for a joint couple. So if you got $1 million, they're going to take that down until you have about a couple $1,000s less before they're willing to pay. So it's not like I can keep a couple 100,000. It's not like I can keep 10%. Very minimal amount you're allowed to keep. But once you qualify, you can then be covered by anything. Obviously, that's just not super ideal because you may have worked your whole life to save your 401k, your 403b, your 457, and you donated it all to a long-term care facility. The long-term care realm has changed pretty drastically over the last couple decades. So just the cost of long-term care services is really growing exponentially, and the amount of Americans needing it is growing exponentially. If if any of you are readers on this call, a great book. It talks about the book called or the book Outlived. And one of the things the doctor in the book talks about is health or lifespan versus health span. So Americans, for the most part, are living longer, but our health span's not increasing. So our lifespan, but not our health span. Health span talks about how long we live healthy for, how long we live and are active for. So Americans are living longer, but they're not necessarily healthy longer. Meaning, basically, what's happening is the length that they're in these long-term care facilities is increasing. The other thing that's happening, especially in New York State, is the availability of coverage when it comes to long-term care insurance has decreased drastically. If you look just about 10, 15 years ago in New York State, there was over half a dozen long-term care insurance providers. Now there are one. Now there's one. Because the cost is skyrocketing and it's largely unpredictable what the future cost is going to be. So insurance companies just aren't willing to cover the cost of long-term care. Now there is good news in this. Is we've seen over the last decade, decade and a half, what we call combination products have increased. Things like life insurance with long-term care riders. So there has been a drastic increase in these types of things versus standalone long-term care policies that do work for people. So there are options. There's growing benefits here, but just knowing that it is a shifting marketplace. It looks very different than 20 years ago. I'll talk to people that say, my parents have this wonderful long-term care policy and you look at it and they're paying $50 a month and it's like, yep, you're going to get nothing like that today, unfortunately. Payouts of benefits. So there's a lot going on this slide. Just talking about Medicare, just to kind of summarize these main things. So overall, Medicare is extremely limited. Don't go into retirement thinking that you're going to pay for long-term care services through Medicare. Medicaid It'll pay out as long as you qualify. And generally speaking, once you start qualifying for Medicaid, you don't stop qualifying because you're under the income and assets threshold. And let's say you have your pension and Social Security, but you don't have any more assets. Medicaid will take your Social Security and your pension check and will donate them to Medicaid to fund the long-term care facility. So your pension and Social Security is not protected from Medicaid in those events. But it'll pretty much cover most of what you need it to cover. You just have to qualify. You have to be under the income and assets threshold to qualify. A standalone long-term care insurance policy. In New York State, these are pretty much gone. Like I said, there's one company that still offers long-term care insurance standalone. It's very, very expensive for not a lot of coverage. So I don't want to say don't look into this route. It's unlikely to prove to be very beneficial for you. But usually with a standalone long-term care policy, you either have a stated amount of coverage, so it might be 100,000, 300,000, 500,000, whatever it might be, or you have a stated time horizon that'll pay out for 30 months, 36 months, 24 months, 48 months, 10 years, whatever it might be. I talked a little bit about it on the last slide. What's become more common is long-term care insurance with long or life insurance with long-term care riders. So they're kind of like hybrid policies. Either you pass away and the life insurance pays out, or if you go into a long-term care facility or need some sort of long-term care, even if it's not a facility, the long-term care rider pays out. These have become way more popular over the last 15 years. They're way more cost effective than a standalone long-term care insurance policy. Generally, they work the same. They either have a certain amount of time that they're going to pay out for, or a certain total balance that they'll pay out for 100,000, 300,000, whatever it might be. Both standalone long-term care insurance policies and life insurance long-term care riders can adjust for the cost of living. It just depends. It's very policy to policy specific. And then there are self-funding options. Now, self-funding options aren't always great if you're starting long-term care planning at 65. But if someone's starting to think about long-term care at 25, 35, they can absolutely start to self-fund for long-term care. And it's not that they can't later on in life, it just becomes a little bit more difficult. Obviously, you can self-fund until the money runs out, and the benefit of the amount is really whatever you saved. But a huge part of where this comes in would be things like HSAs. So as a lot of districts move to high deductible plans and you can put money into an HSA, people want to spend that on copays and things of that nature. But generally speaking, not always, generally speaking, though, the more money you can keep in the HSA can be used to supplement both health and care costs and long-term care costs down the road. So that's one option of many to self-fund long-term care insurance or long-term care planning. Just some other planning considerations. When should you begin planning for long-term care? The earlier, the better. It is no different than retirement planning. It's better to plan for retirement at 20 than it is 30, at 30 than it is 40, 40 than it is 50, 50 than it is 60. People cannot plan for long-term care too early. The problem is most people start to think about long-term care planning when it's relatively close range, when they're 70 and or 65 and it's just a couple years away, which there's still definitely things that can be done, but you have a lot more options on your plate if you're doing it at 25, 35. I literally took out a long-term care policy or a hybrid policy of life insurance long-term care, and to do the long-term care part cost me $3 a month. At 65, it would not cost somebody $3 a month. So there's a lot that can be done, and you don't generally think about, if some of you have kids on the call that are 25, 30, you're probably not talking to them about planning for long-term care, but that is really the best time when they should start planning. Again, not that they can't do anything in the later years, there's just a lot more options early on. Other things to know or be mindful of when it comes to long-term care. Medicaid has what's called a 5-year look back, and they're actually considering changing it to 7. It was 3, it went to 5. They're considering changing it to 7. So Medicaid will force me to spend down my assets to a very minimal threshold before they will start paying for any long-term care services. And if I gave all my assets away last year and then I go into a long-term care facility, Medicaid will actually look back over the last 5 years and they have a clawback provision, meaning they will ask back for any assets that were gifted in 5 years. So again, even if you're gifting assets, you have to start doing this in advance. You can't do it when you start to become less mobile, less active. You have to do it in advance. And if that happens, that's really not on you. That's on your family. Like your family has to come up with the receipts and everything and show where this money went and where it is now and go through that process of the clawback. It is a very stressful process for them to go through. It's honestly an awful process for them to go through. So it's not great when it's not done properly. Trust. Big question that comes up all the time is trust. Should I put my money in a trust? And I am not an attorney, but you do have to be mindful of trust both from a positive and negative standpoint. You lose a lot of control of your money, but it can protect them. There's different types of trust. I won't go too far into it, but just be mindful. Come and talk to somebody before you open up a trust. Ran into people that say, hey, I opened up a trust. It cost me $8,000. And it's like, okay, how much did you put in the trust? I put $100,000 in there. And it's like, well, based on just your normal retirement spending, you're probably going to be out of this money in 10 years. You needed to worry more about retirement than you did protecting this from a long-term care facility. So spending $8,000 on a trust might not have been the best move. And then putting your home in someone else's name, that can be a great option too. You can basically put the home in someone else's name and then have right lifetime use to it. Again, I am not an attorney. I'm not going to go through all the ins and outs of it, but it is a good and viable option out there. There are a lot of options to long-term care planning. There's a lot of information out there. So you probably all have very unique scenarios. Everyone does. There is no cookie cutter approach to long-term care planning. Just talk to somebody, ask your specific questions, go through your specific scenario because long-term care planning ties into everything else. It ties into your retirement planning, your estate planning, everything. And you can't just look at it in one synopsis because that's what happens. People pay $8,000 for a trust, and long and behold, they're going to need that money for retirement. And the money will probably run out before they ever enter a long-term care facility. So you do have options. Just ask questions in this space because there's a lot of components to it.